So I guess my question to the panel is thinking about how best psychologists can engage with the media better, because we've touched on it a few times today, and it's something we need to do more, but I don't feel it's anything that I would even know where to start with. So I'll present that.
Also, we might have to have like a 2-minute time limit per question, so feel free to think quickly, speak quickly.
Dave was on the BBC. Oh, Mark, do you want to go?
Yeah. Go first.
Dave, do you want to say something just because you...
Thanks, Jacqui. Yeah, I mean, I think it's partly, I think first of all is getting the media's attention, which can be quite difficult, and trying to keep it on the agenda that you want to talk about. But then I guess the other way is to respond to things that are topical, really, and trying to make points, but based on that, because that's often the way the media come at things. And the BPS have a media list, so get on that media list and get your trust to know, your employer, to know who you are and what skills and what things you could talk about. And there's lots of media training things out there. It's always very simple. Keep it simple. Make 2 or 3 points, all of that kind of thing, and think about who you're trying to, what message you're trying to get across. Really, it's very basic stuff, but do it and get blogging and get tweeting, and that's why the media seem to hook into people these days.
First of all, I have to say that it's absolutely fantastic to not be on a manual. Like, not be on a manual for once.
This is psychology, isn't it?
Yeah. The thing I'd say about dealing with the media is the first thing is actually have something to say. Don't just make up the numbers, because what you'll find is journalists will contact you as a psychologist because they've got a space in their article that says insert some blah quotes from a psychologist here, and don't play that game. Also, I would say don't ever let your comms department sell your work for you, because they will always have a temptation to missell it, and you'll find yourself defending a position you don't actually hold. There would be my 2 bits of advice. Anyone else?
Well, you can also change it around, because my PR department at the UEL put me forward for this BBC News 24 thing, and they said, we think it'd be a really good idea if you suggested doing some, psychological screening for pilots, and I said, that's a terrible idea. And I explained why it was a terrible idea, and they got behind that and said, okay, yeah, but okay, they're just totally, they didn't really care. But you're absolutely right, and be prepared to turn stuff down. Don't go on Big Brother, for God's sake.
I'm just going to issue another warning, really. I used to do quite a lot of media work before I was trained as a psychologist, and mostly about being a service user from that perspective. But just a lot of experiences of my words being taken out of context, about things being edited without me having any right to reply as to what's coming back on it. So as far as you can, try to get some kind of ownership over what's going out there, because otherwise they will run away with it and make it as titillating as possible. And obviously that's not usually most effective for our cause, so wearing in some caution.
Okay, from a PAA perspective, that's Psychologists Against Austerity, we've found that letters are really good, and using local newspapers can be really effective, more than national, because they're often desperate for stories. So use your local newspapers, use the letter columns, and one of the biggest successes we had was with an alliance with the psychotherapists and counsellors for social responsibility, where we co-signed a letter from 400 mental health professionals about our concerns around austerity and workfare, and that got straight into The Guardian and had a big response. So using allies is really important. Drawing on your own social capital, people who often you might have friends who are in the media, we have no shame in approaching them and using them as much as possible. And also one of the things, just kind of following up about kind of some of the risks, I suppose, is we had a lot of debates about using our professional titles, using our workplaces. So my role in PAA is very different. I have to keep it very separate, and I don't want to be staying at the beginning of everything. In my personal capacity, I'm saying this, so often it's been left to people like Dave and Laura McGrath, who are from universities, who have a bit more freedom, and it's something that we're exploring at the moment, and it's a real kind of pressure point for me of like, what can I say and what can't I say, and how can I make sure that the two are connected, not connected, because some things on, you know, the NHS, if you work in the NHS as well, you do have to follow their media policy, obviously, and so it's tricky. But you can get around it. I've got some nice academic friends who have freedom.
For now.
I'm not on the panel, but I do have one thing to add. I do a little bit of media work sometimes, and I have one piece of advice, and that is never read the comments. Never read the comments to anything you write, because it will just suck your soul out. On that happy note, following those, I have a couple of questions which struck me during the talks. And they do tie into one question that was submitted. Dave and Jacqui, you spoke specifically about sexual abuse, and Jacqui touched on racism. And these are kind of these are obviously very kind of important topics and very kind of expansive ones. We probably haven't got enough time to kind of scratch the surface in the slightest. But thinking about the impact of prejudice, of abuse, of those kinds of adverse experiences, what is the role of the BPS, do you think, in actually tackling these issues? And one of the raised questions which came through was that gender hasn't been mentioned a huge amount today, but we know that women often face different challenges to men. And there's a question about what an epidemiological approach might look like. So if you
You go first.
Oh, thanks, Dave. What can clinical psychology do, or what can the BPS do? One, they could have a branch or department that's looking specifically at race and diversity, I think. You know, the Understanding Psychosis report that I was a part of, that I was really proud of, but I was kind of horrified at the realisation that there was no diversity. And understandably, lots of people really upset about that. So, and you know, people like Suma and Fernando have been talking about institutionalised racism, and I think that's absolutely right, which is uncomfortable, but it's something that we all, and the British Psychological Society needs to look at. I mean, I'm very mindful that all the speakers here today have been white. So again, I think not to just replicate the kind of discrimination that is present in everyday life. You know, as Mark said, that this isn't just dominated by it, because I have that experience a lot being the only female speaker. So I think we need to extend that to other issues like race. In terms of sexual abuse, I mean, I guess one of the things that John Reed's work is about is actually, well, if we know that these things are causal, then how can we use this to prevent these difficulties in the first place? How do we eradicate things like sexual abuse? How do we, if we know that, you know, you're 193 times more likely to go on and develop psychosis with this number of adversities? And for me, something that psychology must do is not see these as kind of deficits. You know, I'm often invited to go and talk to psychologists as part of their abnormal psychology sessions, which frankly is offensive. You know, that my experiences, the ways that I've coped with the horrible things that have happened to me, deem me as being abnormal in some way. I mean, it's kind of a bit cheek, isn't it, really? So, like, stop doing that. That did start. Dave, giving you enough thinking time, yeah?
Well, now I can say you've said it all, Jacqui. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose one of where the question comes from for me is that actually psychology, as Jacqui can very eloquently presented in her kind of talk, that we decontextualise lots of things. So gender often isn't talked about, race isn't talked about, social class isn't talked about, sexuality is not talked about, the experience of mental health problems isn't talked about. And what we tend to do is we kind of produce these kind of abstract models, and then everything else is seen as an add-on, like, well, people might be different in this way, whereas we need to change that way of thinking, because, you know, I'm not some abstract person, I'm a man, I'm a white man, I'm a middle-class man, that's my identity. And so I think that what we need to do in training, for instance, is to try and focus on each of those kind of differences, and then also think about how they dynamically kind of intersect, because there aren't just women, there are middle class women, there are white women, there are black women, all those experiences are different. So in terms of what the BPS can do, I mean, I think, kind of picking up from what Jamie said before, I think sometimes it's a bit easy to get into the BPS is this thing that should do something, but I mean, you know, they don't employ many staff. Most of the people and most of the officers in the BPS things, you know, they're just kind of representing their kind of local area. The BPS is always open to people taking over. You know, so what I would say is, if you're really passionate about something, do it. Apply to the DCP for money. It's got loads of money, and try to do things yourselves. You know, and also put pressure on the BPS to do things that you want it to do. And Jacqui's absolutely right. Lots of the, you know, the Understanding Psychosis report could be accused of institutional racism. I mean, that's not unusual. The BPS is an institutionally racist organisation, like all organisations and bureaucracies are. So is the NHS as well. So is training, and that's, I think the danger is that we end up having a kind of liberal white guilt about that and feel bad. But actually, what we need to be doing is analysing why is it that, you know, there are so many white faces. What's going on in the structure of the profession, in training and so on. What's happening at undergraduate psychology level? What's happening at A-level psychology level? Because all of these discriminations are kind of additive. They're a little bit each time, and it ends up with massive overrepresentation of black people in the criminal justice system. So it's about analysing and then making effective action rather than just feeling guilty.
And if any of the rest of you have anything to add, then please do.
Yeah, I just want to say something about the gender split actually, because I suppose not really an answer to the question, more than another wandering observation, but just about the differences between the UK and the United States, and just thinking about the kind of gender splits there. I think in the States more men tend to become psychologists than in the UK, and I wonder something about the context in terms of a slightly more paternalistic or medical model system, where in kind of a certain gender tends to be more kind of successful. So I'm not sure what we can do about it beyond learning from the context or finding out what actually the differences are within the two various systems. But I suppose just I'm starting to think about psychology doesn't have to be that way. There are other ways of being. I'm not saying the Americans got it absolutely right, but just other ways of thinking about things as well. So not always the end of the story.
I was just going to add to that I think it's important that we don't confuse representation with power. Because it's very easy to say, oh, what we're going to do is very nicely, we're going to include lots of people who aren't usually included in this conversation. And then it's a really nice conversation, and most people go, well, great, will you be involved in the rest of the stuff you do? You go, no, it was brilliant, you were great on the panel, we had a great time on the panel. But yeah, there's nothing for you here now. The thing that sort of more directly addressing the sort of original question is, it seems that there's a very, very strong need to tie or build bridges between sort of ideas of psychology and ideas of social justice. But that's a really, really hot place to find yourself in, because social justice and politics cross over very, very violently in many ways. So you're not going to be able to sail in with one bit of evidence or one idea and go, oh God, yeah, brilliant, I hadn't thought of that before. We'll do exactly what you think and everything will be brilliant. It's going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging, and it's going to be lots and lots of different bits of opinion. And so the other thing I was thinking is, one thing we all can do is we can amplify a range of different voices as we come across them. That isn't about saying to someone, could you please tell me exactly what I need to know about how I can help you? It's, how's your day going? I imagine your day is a bit different from my day. What would you like me to share with other people about how your day's been? So kind of amplifying a range of people's voices that you run into. But hand over the microphone.
Right, we are struggling with the themes, as you may have gathered.
The themes are fine.
Are the themes fine?
Themes are
Right,
great.
I don't understand qualitative analysis. I don't understand regressions. So I was trying to divide questions by the person they were aimed at, and then there's Will here on the other side doing something kind of bizarre that was beyond me, so I'm going to let him deal with these questions.
Right, I know you're going to see why that's a good thing.
I think all your questions.
That's why it's a good thing. No, it works nicely because it kind of leads onto a point that Marcus raised really. We had quite a number of questions. They all touched on issues around how we can use psychology and our psychology skills to actually affect change at a political level. There's a couple of really good points somewhere about how we have research that supports the kind of left-wing ideology, and we're making that point, but at the same time nothing seems to change. So I guess I'll open that back out. Max just touched on some of the points, but sure, things to say to
I mean, the way that I look at it is I've not seen in the last 5 to 6 years anyone make a particularly useful or convincing case for a sort of right-wing view of some of the things that we hold to be very dear about psychology and helping people and changing things and equality and stuff like that. We've kind of assumed that either you are with us or you're against us, and I think that's really problematic if you're looking at influencing policy or influencing political change. You need to find a way of making a case that speaks to the people who currently hold the power. And what happens when you try to do that very often is the people who consider themselves to be more radical than you will accuse you of selling out, and you'll end up being shot by both sides. But it's a kind of very, very complicated process of not assuming that your evidence is going to win, because policy and politics is not made by evidence, it's made by lots of other competing factors. It's about finding a narrative that works for the people that you're trying to get to do something. And I don't think we've been particularly good at that. We've just assumed, well, it'll be alright, like if we're people who lie to the centre or to the centre left, it'll be alright, we'll obviously vote this government out, and it'll be brilliant, and then all the money will come back, and then there'll be angels every morning in the sky. We'll never stub our toes, everyone will be happy. But I think the reality of it is somewhat more uncomfortable and potentially more conflicted over time. I'll hand on the microphone to whoever wants it.
Yeah. I mean, I think Mark's absolutely right. I mean, I guess one of the things that struck me in my time of sort of trying to bring about change and just getting my head around how it's all working is that in many ways I think politicians of all persuasions are really invested in individualising people's problems, because, if some of the research that I and other people have shown today is true, which I think it probably is, that if many mental health problems are a response to the kind of injustices, discrimination, etc., then I think consciously or unconsciously they've got quite big investment in not getting it, because then they will have to sort it out. And I don't know that they actually really want to sort it out. So I think something that I've been thinking more about is that something that really strikes me is that many people that I meet say, with horror, do you know how bad services are? Because they've just experienced them, or somebody they love has just experienced them. And I think until you know up close what it's like, you're not aware of it, because it doesn't really affect you. So I think part of what we need to do is involve the public more. And, so this idea of a public health campaign, but actually, psychologists against austerity, but actually getting communities involved in thinking about, well, why has my kid got diagnosis of ADHD, or why is my doctor telling me that I should take these antidepressants when actually I'm just like poor and unhappy? Should I do that or not? And is there something else I could be doing? And I think we need to this idea of getting out of the psychology room and actually involving communities in bringing about those kinds of changes, much like Sue Holland's work. But in lots of other ways as well that I haven't got the answers to, but I think, involving the public, because actually if we just wait for the people in power to do it, I don't think it's going to happen, actually.
Sorry, I couldn't help but follow that, because it kind of led me into what I was saying. I'm going to say, I'm just briefly touching on my role in MAC UK, where we're trying to radically transform services for excluded young people. And we've been doing, we've developed a model which works at multiple levels, and I think we are now looking at ways we can take this idea, much like the work that you do, Emma, like how we use this idea of working as a clinician, how you work at multiple levels, and in partnership with the young people. So we co-produce our services with young people, our projects, And we had to do that by spending the first 6 months to a year just hanging out with young people in the places that we do it, to meet them, to get to know them, to build relationships. And we've done that in the third sector, but we're trying to get that idea across into the NHS. And there is an open door there is, through service user movement and participation. And then help supporting young people to think of ways that they want the service, the systems at a local level to be different. So what I would say is one of the things we've had most success at, again, is working at a local level with Camden Council, for example, or with Haringey Council, for example, and working in partnership with young people. Nothing speaks to commissioners as well as getting a young person from the community, getting them into the room with them, and actually, and that being seen as a core part of our work, because then we're working at these 3 different levels. We're working with the individual young person. We're working at a relationship level with other agencies and in partnership with other organisations, and we're working at a community and society level as well. And I think community psychology has a lot of examples of this, and I would encourage you to go and kind of have a look around. There's loads of ways, other examples of this where people do work at these multiple levels all the time.
That's gone up.
Yeah, I think it did go on.
Shout. So, I mean, I did just following on from Sally there, I mean, I think also one of the things is, because we can think that politics is just out there, somebody else's business, but, you know, one of the things, nothing really happens with people on their own. Things have always come out of people working together in groups. So there's a lot of trainees here. I'm guessing there's lots of trainees from the same courses. Get yourselves together in little groups and think about what you can do. Might start off by discussing things, but think about what kind of campaigns you might be interested in supporting, or what kind of ways in which you could lend your skills and resources to things, and get involved with making alliances. For those who are qualified or people who are on placement, think about how you could maybe start discussion groups at work, because I think there's also something about just generally politicising people, and not for people to regard politics as just something that's just going to be left-wing kind of ideologues or right-wing ideologues. You know, it's everyday people, and things are only going to change when the vast majority, the centre ground of people change their minds, and you're part of that group that could change that. Talk to your friends and family members about what's going on. As Jacqui said, make these things visible. It seems to be perfectly possible for lots of people to vote for a government that is promising to cut huge swathes out of the welfare system and out of the public sector. If nothing is going to politicise people, the next 5 years will do. So let's make the most of it. Let's make those cuts visible. You're going to be seeing clients who are going to be on the sharp end of that. Start blogging about that. Start tweeting about that. Write to the local newspaper. Make it difficult for people to ignore that. It's only then that we're going to be able to get things to change. Vote Obama.
It's working well.
Okay, I'll shout. Okay, so the next theme is one that we've kind of revised as we've been talking, really, because we've covered some of the points. So if I don't ask your question exactly, hopefully we've covered the general kind of gist of it. But I'm going to direct this one in the first instance to Emma, because your name's actually on them, quite a few of them. But obviously we want everyone's chip in as well. But I guess there's something about engaging with commissioners to get services like yours actually up and running in the first place, and actually being able to take a kind of psychological principles and get the ball rolling, getting the money to finance these things, particularly, and maybe this is where other people can chip in, within the context of NHS structures, you know, particularly the kind of more complex end of things, working with people who have very long-standing or complex problems, or people who might be at high risk.
And that flows quite nicely from the last point about having a political focus, actually. And I think there's lots of opportunity for us to be really involved in contributing, designing and developing services in the direction that we want them to go. And I think we need to understand that, and even relatively early on in your career you can have opportunities to be influencing the services that you're delivering. And I think we come out as really strong broad skill set as clinical psychologists, and we need to be drawing on all of those and holding that in mind, that we are developing evidence bases, we're making robust arguments, we're thinking about our audience and what's going to interest them, as well as then having our own agenda that we might want to be meeting. So I think we need to think quite strategically and politically about how we go about providing services. Commissioners will have particular agendas. There might be populations that they don't see as essential in their commissioning needs, so you need to be thinking, if you're trying to meet a gap in services, where the argument is for that, how you're highlighting the failures in existing models and provision. That commissioners are available, you need to get to know them, you need to be prominent, you need to be finding out what's interesting them, what's the argument, so that we're having to make quite a robust health economic case, as you kind of got a bit of a flavour, to then fulfil the agenda that, to make sure that services and needs are met. And I agree, I think it was Jacqui made the point about the longer term therapy, and that therapeutic relationship being really important, and a drive towards briefer and shorter sticking plaster treatments all the time. And if we're thinking that is where the evidence base is, and that there isn't a quick fix, we need to be showing that there's a benefit to that, and actually how are we evidencing that, because it's expensive, and actually my service is very expensive. We've got a large number of expensive clinicians for the ratio of service users, but my argument is that actually that front load preventative funding saves money across all of the system. And that's where we need to be thinking about changing the way we commission and think about services, so that it's a shared responsibility, and that we have maybe services that are commissioned from multiple funding sources, and so it's not a health responsibility. The guys that I work with, they impact all services. They are impacting on London Ambulance Services and the police and A&E and the hospitals, which all have different pots of money. They have an effect on social care services and the accommodation services, etc., etc. It goes on. And actually they're not one person's responsibility to be thinking about services, so we need some more joined up thinking. And there are service models out there that are doing that as well. So visiting those places, finding out who's doing what, how did they draw these different stakeholders in, and what were the arguments they were making for the various stakeholders to get them interested. I think that we can be quite involved in actively designing services and getting funding, and particularly this new drive of psychologists as leaders. This is part of that skill set that we can bring to make change.
Comprehensive answer. Does anyone have anything to add?
We need money, that's what I'm thinking. Can anyone tell that I've got the commissioning on my mind for a 3 years' time?
I've got a few thoughts about this. As someone coming from outside of the NHS who's been trying to get money to make things happen, one of the first things you have to be careful of is the idea of disruption. Very often, in your sort of visionary zeal to make a change, what you do is you approach someone who's got some money and you go, could you please give me the money you would normally spend on the thing you're already providing, could you please give the money to me so I can do it better? Which is basically saying to them, guess what? I think you're shit.
Yeah.
And because I think you're shit, what I want you to do is give us a load of money. Be careful of that, because it took me a long time to realise that we've been trying to sell stuff to people on the basis that we were telling them they were rubbish at what they were already doing. People don't tend to like that very much, even if you're right. To make sure that you're kind of closer to right than not right, what you've got to make sure is that when you have an idea, you know whether it's a good idea or not. Because you'll need to know whether the barriers you face are the fact that you're kind of a visionary who's ahead of their time and that no one's kind of got up and caught up with you yet, or the barriers you face is you're just trying to sell a three-legged dog. And it's actually not a very good idea. The way that you find out whether your idea is a good idea is you talk to as many people as possible about it, and you revise it, you change it, you iterate it. Always, always, always go back to the people you're meant to be trying to help and check whether you've understood their problems correctly. And sometimes that's part of a much more detailed model. Sometimes you're looking at something much smaller, you're just going, you said that you kind of thought we should do something about this. Have I got a hold of the right end of the stick? And also, the best guide you can ever get to making this sort of stuff happen is something that's just happened on this panel, is you get the chance to talk to someone who's done something similar. I have an absolute hatred of best practice models, because I think best practice models tell you nothing about how trying something might work in your area or in your service. They're kind of innovation with the serial numbers filed off. What you actually need to do is not go to the person who collected the best practice, go to the person who did the best practice. Go to the person who did it originally, don't go to the academic who studied it. Because what you need to do is you need to find out the grim, little, gritty, tiny details about what makes something work and what doesn't make it work. They're kind of my sort of coming completely outside of the NHS, so I might be talking out of my house from your perspective. But they're my kind of guides to making stuff happen. Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah, there's one more. Again, we're probably not going to cover everything in complete detail, but quite a few people asked about clinical psychology training. Obviously, there's a lot of trainees in here today. So a couple of the, I guess, the main themes that came out were about what training can do to skill people up to become more active in these areas, to become, as Sally mentioned, the activist practitioner kind of way of thinking earlier. And then also something about kind of how safe it is for trainees to do that at the early stages of their career when they're still trying to get secure employment, and you know, when there's all these other kind of variables to be thinking about from a kind of a selfish point of view of making sure that you're not kind of setting yourself up for a fall, really. So yeah, I guess my question really is about how can clinical psychology training skill people to engage with these kinds of issues in the best way?
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. I'm actually, well, I did. I'm actually just about supervising a project of a trainee who's asking this very question about what skills and competencies do we need by interviewing people who work at a kind of macro level, interviewing clinical psychologists who work at a macro level, that's where most of their work is done. And finding out what skills it is that you need, because at the moment I don't think it's actually very well covered and in sessions. But I think for me, a lot of my thinking was actually to reframe it as actually this is the real leadership. This area is the real leadership, and having confidence that what you believe in terms of social justice and looking for new ways of doing things that move us on from the expert position, doing to communities, all these things, that's real leadership. And so the idea that might not be safe ground, it might not be safe ground, but at the same time it's very much the ground that we should be moving to. And I think if you can actually reframe it in your minds as you're forging new ground and pioneering new work, and that you want to start doing that more and more, and so asking your courses about that, about how many people have had community psychology training on their course? How many people have had come in? Okay, so that for a start, you could invite any community psychologist in, to someone like Mark Burton, Carolyn Kagan, these people who are around who could come and do some teaching on the skills that you need to like work alongside communities, for example, and kind of do things a bit differently. So for me, it's about kind of getting that message across that actually this is the way we want to be working, and these are the skills that we need, looking around who's doing it already and pulling it in. And I'll let you know when Nina's finished her project about what specifically she finds.
I mean, some of the things, I do quite a lot of teaching to clin psychs in training, and some of the things that I think are important, some of the stuff you said about wounded healers, I think most people come into mental health to work on their own mental health, actually. And so actually the people that I think are most effective are the ones that have done some work on themselves and know what their own stuff is and know what's brought them into mental health, and are not trying to resolve it unconsciously through their work with other people. So I'd say, yeah, sort yourself out. I'd also say that when you're a trainee and you're in a multidisciplinary team meeting and you're trying to advocate some of the stuff we've been talking about today, you may well be shut up and shut down. So you sometimes need to be strategic, you need to choose your battles, you need to play the long game. I think you need to have settings where you can just let rip, you know, and just, you know, say how frustrating or disgusted or hurtful or ashamed or embarrassing certain things that happen are, just to get that out and to get your kind of reality affirmed and to feel that you've got allies that get where you're coming from. I also think that you need to not burn out. So I think you need to look after yourselves. I think you need to have fun. I think you need to go and stare at clouds and go out dancing and, you know, just because that keeps you a fully rounded human being and not just be stuck with your head in a book or get, you know, just it becomes a little bit unbalanced. So just keep, that's what I try and do anyway. Keep some kind of balance in my life. And the other thing is, don't just talk to psychologists. I mean, I'm not like I'm the only non-psychologist probably in the room. And, oh, there's the other guy from Lancaster. But actually, I'm interested in like-minded people, whether you're a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a nurse. I don't actually care. It's about people who have similar values and are committed to the same sort of stuff as me. So really cutting across your, you know, kind of the elitism of being a psychologist and actually just kind of being with other cool people who kind of get it, really.
I'm going to have to, we've got 3 more questions.
Oh my,
we've
can't we go home?
You can. You've got 5 minutes for these 3
very
questions.
quickly say one thing there, because I just agree with it very quick. But because I think there's a kind of chilling effect around, it seems to me, that people get very, very worried about this kind of stuff. This is not like crazy radical stuff. This is very mainstream stuff. There's a whole area called community psychology. It's entirely legitimate and valid. And when you think about what's mainstream now, like CBT for psychosis was crazy, wacky stuff 20 years ago. All the stuff that's mainstream now was on the fringes ages ago. So have a sense of history, that, you know, have some bravery. There's nobody been thrown up a training course for talking about social justice, you know. So get a grip, make this stuff, you know, talk about it. Get a grip. Not, you know, just stop being so afraid. You're on the fucking course now.
Two questions, because that very eloquently gave us a short shrift. Right, now I'm going to give you 10 seconds each to answer this question, because we're not playing silly bugs, it's Friday afternoon, I want to go home.
Yeah, me too.
What stands out from each other's talks? Boom, 10 seconds. Come on.
Oh, Christ. No, can we go for the other end? He's got
Come on, Dave, you're
I
fine.
can't remember anything.
Swear off something good, Dave.
God, I don't know. I enjoyed them all. I mean, that's it. You know, they're all thought-provoking and in different ways.
Is that it? Is that what I'm getting for this question?
Could you just
It's a hard one, really, isn't it?
or give us 10 minutes each on each other's presentation?
What I can say is I was kind of really pleasantly surprised that I thought I was kind of going out on a limb with some of the stuff that I wrote, and it was really, really nice to actually hear that all the people kind of in the therapy room, if you like, were saying very, very similar things to me. And bearing in mind I'm a complete outsider who just rocks up to things and shoots their mouth off occasionally, it was really, really heartening to see basically the same arguments being made from within the profession. That stuck with me.
As kind of an organiser and not as a speaker, I like the kind of spirit of revolution that I felt today, and I felt very proud actually of a lot of stuff that's being said, and of my colleagues. And I consider you all colleagues, you know, whatever your kind of professional background. So that for me has stood out enormously. And Steve's going to close shortly, but I think it's been an absolutely fabulous day. I'd like to thank you on my own behalf for putting the time and the effort in. But the very last question, if we see mental health as influenced by societal rather than biological factors, do you think the National Health Service, designed to cure and improve health and illness, is the best place for psychology? See? Good answer. You think I can't show Plenary? Come on!
It's only an historic mistake that mental health ended up in the NHS in the first place. Because if you go back to the argument about where the asylums were going to be placed when the NHS was founded, it could have ended up in social care, which would have completely changed most of the discourse about mental health in the UK. So it's only a historic mistake that ended up in the NHS in the first place. Always worth bearing that in mind.
Should it not be in the NHS?
I think it depends on whether you're looking at mental health difficulty as a chronic condition or an episodic one, because I think often people with mental health difficulties have needs that are closer to social care needs than they are to medical treatment needs. It kind of depends what your difficulty is and how it impacts in their life. So I think a lot of the stuff that we kind of get a load of shit about because the NHS can't do it, it's because the NHS literally cannot do it. It's not set up to do it. So there's a load of unmet needs come because we keep saying, oh, we need to bring together our social care and our NHS. It's like actually a lot of the mental health stuff probably lies in social care and should have been there from the start. That'd be my position.
I think we're going to have to wrap it up there.
No, that's
No, you're chair.
Mark's our spokesperson.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for all your questions. I hope you've got to the majority of them, and thank you for sticking around. If you give us 1 minute, Steve will very rapidly close, I believe.
Okay, yeah, just to let you know that all of these speakers who came today have come for nothing. We've done our very best to keep costs as low as possible to enable as many people as possible to come. That's why we've done a lot of the work, all the work in our own time, and all these people are here with no charge attached. So we should thank them all for that. And lastly, I put a message out on Twitter asking if anybody had any questions for the plenary, so I should probably finish with one. Sometimes you put something out and loads comes back, sometimes you get one thing. In this case it's one thing, and I think we should all ask it of ourselves as we leave. The question is, will there ever be born a boy who can swim faster than a shark? So next speakers, thank you. Masuma, Will, Sarah, and all the other important